Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Svelte Radio. Today we have another guest on the show, but first, introductions. I'm Kevin, and I run a site called Svelte School, where I teach people about Svelte. And yeah, that's me.
I'm Shawn. I work as a developer advocate at AWS, and I guess I do stuff on this Svelte Twitters.
Hi, I'm Antony. I'm the CTO of a startup called Biank. I'm a supposed Svelte maintainer, and yeah, that's about it, really. I'm also going to introduce the guest because I know everything there is to know about Luke. So our guest is Luke, and Luke is not Australian. That's the first most important thing there.
I am
so
not.
Luke Edwards is not Australian, he's Californian. That's very important to know. He's also a co-maintainer of Svelte, and he's the creator of Polka, which is an Express alternative, which is focused around speed and also modularity, I believe. And he's been recently involved in deploying loads of stuff to Cloudflare Workers, which is interesting. There's a whole talk on that you can watch. It's also worth mentioning that Luke owns the most number of open source modules on NPM out of anyone. And that's a fact.
That is
Wow,
not
really?
true.
Anything
is
to
not
add, Luke,
true.
apart from that's not true?
And that's pretty much it. I do a lot of stuff in the open source world, and I imagine we'll talk about some of that. But for the most part, I just keep my head down and enjoy building things. So that's kind of, whether that means contract work or salary positions, doesn't really matter. I just love to get my hands dirty.
So you
Nice.
don't code for money as a rule, you code for passion, and money is a convenient side.
I code for interest. I turn away not a lot, but I turn away clients with that sometimes, just because if I'm not interested in it, then it's not going to turn out well, and I'm going to find excuses to try to stop doing it.
Nice.
So.
It's funny because I saw a Twitter thread quite recently about actually what got you into tech, and the amount of people who'd replied by just showing a little dollar emoji was quite shocking, actually. I couldn't imagine being it just for the money. It just wouldn't work for me.
I mean, I'd say it's partially for the money for me.
Fair enough. I mean, it's
You
not,
gotta eat.
but you have a passion in it, right? You enjoy what
Yes,
you do. You
yes.
enjoy advocating as well, and that sort of thing. But just for the money, just, I don't know. Enjoy life, right? Enjoy life first, and then
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I could see myself doing something I don't want to do.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Well, it's also kind of amazing because like some people will make like hard career changes, right? Where they're like struggling and stuff, and they'll invest the 6 months, whatever it is, maybe less, and like dramatically turn their lives around. So it does start as just money, but like it's so that they can actually do something else and get by better.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Maybe people can grow a passion for it when they start doing it. Maybe that's how they got into it, but that's not where they are
Yeah.
now, maybe.
I think
Yeah,
that's
that's fair.
definitely true.
I think that's actually kind of at the core of how I started too. Like I actually was like enrolled in med school. I hadn't started yet. I was doing all the like prereqs and stuff. And
Wow.
I guess disclaimer, self-taught. But I was maintaining a nutrition blog to kind of like chronicle my journeys through what would be med school and stuff. And as I'm preparing and like working on this, how do I make my WordPress do X, or how do I make this better? I just unfolded more and more. And at some point, like someone just handed me a client and said, "Hey, do you think you can build this?" I said, "Sure, I'll give it a crack." And I got paid. I was like, well, why am I going to sign my life away for another like 6 to 10 years before I start getting paid if I can just do this now? And
Yeah.
then a passion developed because just questions befolded more questions. So
So you started in WordPress then,
oh yeah.
your coding career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have not touched it in it's now been a decade, but it's still
Yeah.
alive. It's still kicking.
So can you take us through what your journey has been from WordPress to
Oh,
where
gosh.
you are now?
So I mostly started as a designer, actually. So I was doing my own WordPress stuff, and I was focused on design, and I wanted cool carousels and stuff. So that first client I was talking about was mostly a design work, and then I just implemented it in like basic HTML, CSS, which was all it needed. But it was mostly design based, and then a couple that lended itself to other projects. So basically, I got lucky, and it became like word of mouth thing because they knew no one. So all those sort of projects just sort of like honed my design skill set, but then it also honed more front end work. So I I started going from the Backbone route into Marionette, and then I stuck with Riot for a long time. But basically a lot of front end work, and then at some point over like the next 3 or 4 years, I started having to work with or alongside backend engineers. So back into WordPress, back into custom PHP stacks. So a lot of CodeIgniter, a lot of beginning Laravel stuff. And so that gave me some of the beginnings of the full stack experience. And then I became more full stacky on future clients, same clients or new ones, and basically lived with a foot in each world for a while. Well, I guess 3 worlds, because there was design in there too. But yeah, and then so the PHP stuff eventually evolved into Elixir. And then I came full circle back into Node.js world, because I was thinking why Elixir was kind of starting, not kind of, it was definitely still in its infancy. A lot more people have heard about it now, which is a good thing. Check it out if you haven't. So I started doing a lot more Node.js just because serverless was popping up, and just there were a lot more companies working with Node.js at the time. And it was just easier to market yourself as a full stack contractor when you can prove your JavaScript skills on both front end and back end. And so that's kind of where I've been. I've dabbled in other stuff along the way, but that's kind of the like core synopsis of where things are at.
So have you tried any of the other front-end frameworks like React? All of them?
All of them. Just because as a contractor, you don't really have a choice. You just have to be able to jump into whatever you're doing. It's not the common case that you're starting something from scratch. So it's just whatever they've got, you've got to work with it, try to improve it, build new features, whatever it is. So I've done everything except for anything after Angular 2, right? But like all the other, I refuse to touch Angular after 2. No, like shots fired. It's just, there's no like new utility for me with it anymore. And it's not all that common anymore either, at least in the contract scene.
So you've been a contractor for all this long. Like, haven't you been tempted to be an employee?
I was for the majority of the last decade, but I did. So sometimes I would sign on for like a long-term contract, like with a couple companies. But for my longest was with a company for 2 years. They were transitioning into an advertising company, and so that's where I basically stopped at the beginning of this year, just before COVID lockdown stuff. So good timing on that. But I was there for 2 years and doing all of their back end stuff, all the architecture, a lot of front end. But luckily, people came in to do the front end work too.
And something that's kind of weird because I don't think contracting is as common in the US as it is in the UK.
I don't think it is. If I tell new friends or extended relatives I haven't met before, like I'm contracting, they get a little like, I think it's just a way to say unemployed. But
really?
Yeah,
it's definitely a different market. I mean, it's changed over here quite recently, I think, because of the whole tax crackdown and stuff like that. But contracting used to be where people would aim for, and it's kind of weird when Shawn says like, "Weren't you tempted to be an employee?" It almost never crossed my mind when I was contracting, and then one day I did it, and I spent all the time regretting it and thinking, "When can I go back contracting again?" It's really different.
I was definitely feeling that towards like the halfway mark of that salary position I was talking about. Just the reason I don't know if this is how like I naturally am, or if contracting just like promoted it, but I tend to have project ADD, right? Like hence all the modules. But so if I'm working on a contracted thing, there's a fixed start and end date for the most part. So like once that end date has come and gone, I can move on to something else, either a new client entirely or just some other new project, and like that works. But if I'm staring at the same stuff for too long, my eyes tend to glaze over. And
yeah, that's fair enough.
My impression of how it works in the UK is that like that's actually how you get the better paying jobs is you contract, because there's some sort of rule where you have to, if you go above a certain amount, then there's some tax issue. Is that I assume that's what Antony's referring to? Yeah,
there's loads of weird rules. They've changed it all recently. Like when I stopped contracting, which is like 4 or 5 years ago now, they changed all the tax rules around it. But it used to be that you're a company, so you only paid corporation tax. There were a bunch of tax breaks, but also you'd usually get paid maybe 3 times as much as a permanent role and the equivalent. So anyone with any seniority would go into contracting because it made sense, at the time. But I think a lot of people abused the taxing and tried to pay basically zero tax. They got into a lot of trouble. The government cracked down on it because it's kind of an easy win for them. So it's, in terms of payment wise, it's become a lot less attractive. And they've removed a lot of the protections you had as a contractor, because when I was contracting, for example, I was basically an employee anyway. I was treated like an employee by the company. I didn't have to get all the shit work. I had the good work and stuff like that. It wasn't anything like a kind of, you come in because you can tackle these problems and we don't care about you or anything like that. So it's a very different market in the UK, or it was, than it is in other countries.
Let's say in the US, it's like freelancing or consulting as well. These are different terms that people use.
Yeah. Contracting usually means you have a limited company and you treat yourself as a company. You go in, they don't tell you when to come in. They just say, this is what we want you to do it, kind of thing. And you act as if you're a company, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Sounds about right. All right.
Yeah.
Should we get into some on-topic stuff? Svelte stuff. Yeah. So you did a talk at Svelte Summit about Cloudflare Workers, right? Server-side rendering.
Yeah.
What was that about?
So, I mean, where do you want me to start? I guess should I give like a primer on workers, or
just a summary of the talk, right?
Okay. So basically, I spent probably like 20 minutes out of my 30 minutes kind of explaining what workers are from a front end developer's point of view, right? Like there's service workers, which like some people are happy about, some are mad about, web workers, worklets, which didn't matter. But basically, I gave this little like timeline of what workers are and how we may already be familiar with them, and then how Cloudflare workers are kind of the same thing, but in a server. The same thing as a service worker, but in one of their servers. And then the big reveal sort of thing was just that Cloudflare servers are everywhere, and so that means that your code will run everywhere. And because it's the way Cloudflare workers themselves are architected, they're basically always on all the time, but you're not paying for that, which is what you would get with a traditional global architecture like one that I set up at my last company, which you pay for it 24/7. So hugely, way cheaper. And then I went through a couple of demos to show you like how you can just get started with Svelte server-side rendered within a worker. And I deployed 2 demos of that. One where it was like mostly manual. So it kind of showed you like what that repo is still live. So it shows you all the manual configurations and how you would go through it step by step. And then like the last 30 seconds of the talk, I revealed this new tool called Freshie, which is kind of all those configurations and build steps done for you. So that with Freshie, you can build your app as if you would with a Sapper or Next.js, and then build it in a way so that it's ready for Cloudflare Workers or for Node.js, whatever you want, which obviously has overlap with the SvelteKit project, but same sort of thing. So it was just this summary is turning into as long as the talk, but the whole thing was just, this is what workers are. This is how you can exploit them to your benefit as a Svelte developer.
Cool. So speaking of SvelteKit and Cloudflare, I'm a huge Cloudflare worker fan myself. So I just got to ask it. Are you working on an adapter for?
There is one being worked on. I personally haven't worked on it yet, just because SvelteKit itself is still kind of, it's like interface design is a little bit in flux still. So some of the way the current adapters are, which are all node focused, there's a lot of assumptions within SvelteKit itself that like we have a node backend, but that's not true with the worker. So Half Nelson, I think, is the one who's done the initial adapter for it, and he's sort of relaying his findings with what needs to change within the current SvelteKit to accommodate this. Freshie solved it just by basically duplicating the same routing logic, whatever, in different ways for each adapter, which is duplication, but like each of those things only exist once per package, so it's not too bad.
I think what we found is that, so I've written these 2 adapters for SvelteKit, and Rich has written one, and we've rewritten them all at least 3 times. But what we found every time we've rewritten them is they've become smaller and more concise, but they've all boiled down to essentially the same bit of code because everything runs on AWS Lambda underneath. Whereas the Cloudflare Workers, like Luke says, is a completely different approach. It doesn't have Node. It doesn't have all the libraries you need. It's very much, I'm glad I didn't attack it myself, actually, because I would be so lost. I think it's made us think about what the scope of an adapter is and what it should do as well. Because originally we had this view that an adapter might deploy the code as well, but what that comes out as is we'd have 100 different adapters for every single possible deployment platform, when fundamentally they all do the same thing. So yeah, it's very in flux, and yeah, like Luke says, it is being worked on. It's just it's one of those game-changing ones.
I think this choice of being node-based is interesting. I do see that more design decisions on projects are like, should we assume node because of environments like Deno, Cloudflare Workers? Like, these are all just, I guess, isolates based. I like the technical knowledge to go any further, but it seems like there's a slow movement in JS to diversify away against from Node. I don't know if you guys see this as well.
So basically, like Node, I guess Cloudflare. Yeah, maybe.
Like not assuming Node APIs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
maybe.
feels like a good thing, though.
It's weird because people always describe JavaScript as a bad language. I think ES6 has kind of allayed a lot of those concerns. So maybe it's now that people feel the language is so good that we just need to be able to run that same language across multiple platforms, a bit like the JVM does for Java and Groovy and Clojure and every other Scala. I've forgotten even how many languages there are on the JVM, but all of them. Maybe that's where we're going with JavaScript. I don't know. Or it's where we're going with ES6, perhaps. I don't know.
I think the only like real limitation is when you get into things like file system APIs, right? And I don't even know if Deno has I know it has a file system API, but I don't know if it has one that will magically work in the browser, right? Like maybe that's where they draw the hard line too. But I think until you solve that or things like that, there will always be some sort of division. But yeah, I mean, I agree that like JavaScript should be able to just run everywhere because that's sort of the whole like tagline, right? Like JavaScript, it just runs unless you need compilers and whatever else. But
yeah, I think it's always been a missing puzzle piece for me. It's a puzzle piece that people probably like you and like Rich actually have, that you build something that's concise but so generic that it can work from a multitude of scenarios. And this is the same now because we're saying that SvelteKit can run on multiple different backends or hosting platforms. We have to find the right abstraction level that we can take a SvelteKit app and pump it into this and come out with something that'll run that platform. And it's something I've never really had the opportunity to do before, but also never really figured that I had a plan for doing that. How do you build a framework? Because I don't know how the world's going to use it, kind of thing. And it's something I think some people have and some people just don't. And I'm definitely one of the ones who doesn't.
Right. So yesterday I saw you posted a new library, another one, or I don't know what you would call it. Maybe not a library, but a preprocessor, I guess.
Oh, yeah. That one's more of like it's like a proof of concept sort of thing. So for everyone listening, it's Svelte preprocess ES build, and there's ES build is this magical Golang driven bundler, which also happens to transpile JavaScript and TypeScript at like blazingly fast speeds. So I've seen some ES build Svelte like combinations already in the community, but a lot of them just don't bother dealing with TypeScript within the script tags. And like, so you'll have ES build there, but then these things are just passing the TypeScript through like regular TypeScript, which is slow or slower than ES build. So I was like, well, you just have ES build do both. Like, have it do both, and what's the problem? So I found out that there are problems, and I'm working to fix them. But the whole project itself is sort of meant to be a proof of concept or like a guinea pig, because it should live within Svelte preprocess itself. So this is kind of a way to just like test in the real world and like get some mileage on it before bringing that risk into Svelte preprocess directly. And the reason that's possible is because I think as of the most recent major version, Svelte preprocess doesn't do type checking anymore. So ES build doesn't do type checking. So now their goals sort of align.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of brings me to a question that I guess I always wondered, but Svelte preprocess used to be a third-party sort of extension to Svelte. And I think it's been brought in to Svelte, like the Svelte org, as part of the TypeScript support movement. is that something that's basically formally managed by the core team now? Is that how it works?
Right. The people who are already working on Svelte preprocess before the migration are still the ones working on it. They're just also maintainers. So they're just working on the official org project now, but it's the same project. It's just relocated.
And you're thinking that the future Svelte preprocess might be ES build
for the TypeScript integration. So the way that works is basically it's set up with a bunch of transformers ready to go. So long as you have the correct flags within your component markup directly. So for TypeScript, that might mean laying equals TS, laying equals TypeScript, source equals, there's a bunch of triggers, but it will then only successfully do something if you have the TypeScript pure dependency installed. So it doesn't bring everything with you because it does a dozen or more things: post CSS, Sass, stylus, pug, a bunch of stuff. So it's pre-configured to do what you want, but you have to bring the engine to do those things.
This is news to me. I'm learning a lot on this podcast.
Admittedly, I haven't used most of it. I know there's a dozen or almost a dozen, but it's pretty much every front end tech you can think of is already pre-configured through Svelte preprocess, and a lot of things that I think wouldn't make sense. Again, like pug, not to pick on it, but
I agree.
Yeah, it's just ready to go, and you just have to install one thing and you're done.
It's a nice user experience or developer experience. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing that you're building it in public, sort of, because I think you guys always push for like someone to do it in public first, and then it can be brought in to Svelte. I think I've heard that several times. It's a good thing. It's like the actions package that you started, Shawn.
Yeah, I haven't touched it recently, but someday we'll get that merged.
I mean, this is it. People ask people ask how to contribute a lot, and I think that's a good way. If you make a product that is good enough, then there's no reason that couldn't become part of like the core organization. It's a good way to sort of get your contribution in, really.
Yeah. Another example of this, and I hope it's fine to mention, but now I'm forgetting the name. Anyway, in the maintainers chat, there was Antony, maybe you remember details, but there was an error boundary component that was shared from a Svelte library, and never would have thought to set up a component that way. And I thought it was news to me. It was awesome, and Rich saw it too and was also surprised, and a bunch of us were surprised and impressed by it. So now it's not an ongoing conversation, but briefly in the moment we talked about should something like this be part of core Svelte, because it was such its utility was obvious as soon as you saw it, and there was enough documentation examples there that it's just it's one of those things where an RC would have been good, but seeing it actually alive and working and proven is just okay, you can't really argue with that.
Yeah, so this is Crown Frameworks error boundary component. So I think Jathan made it, but actually Half Nelson was the one who originally conceived the idea. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it kind of monkey patches a Svelte component so that you can define a perimeter around in your component hierarchy where errors will be caught and dealt with in line. And I think other frameworks kind of have this already, and we don't. So they made this component and published it because they are building like a Shopify kind of equivalent, but in Svelte. And it's something I've wanted for quite a long time. And there was an issue about it. There's no formal RFC like Luke says, but there's an issue about it. And it does work really well. The monkey patching is concerning because obviously if we decide to change the way components are built, it will break. So there's that kind of watch out. And I thought, well, this is probably pretty valuable. It works well, and it's got a kind of a nice Svelte fluent UI, not UI, but kind of interface. So yeah, and it actually is quite surprised because maybe I spent a lot more time in the community, but people hadn't seen this, they hadn't been exposed to it. So those people that saw it were quite impressed with it. So I was happy about that, and it hopefully will be discussed at the next maintainers meet if I can get it high up enough the list. The original authors of it are very interested in making it part of core Svelte, it being a PR, but obviously they also have real jobs, so they're not going to promise anything before the end of the year or even maybe January. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's definitely something that we like to have because it's super valuable to be able to catch errors within a certain hierarchy and and deal with them there rather than your whole application exploding.
Yeah. So didn't you add this to biank? I think you were talking about
I
this.
have, yeah. Checkout now uses it, so anything that's in probably the most critical part of the application will now be caught. And what we did actually, we installed Sentry. So Sentry, for those who don't know it, catches errors and logs them and gives you a stack trace in a kind of isolated system, so you can see when users are having front end errors in your site that you can't otherwise see in your logs. I talked to the guys at Sentry about what's going on here. Why isn't there a Svelte integration? Kind of trolling them really, because they had React and Ember and everything else. And they replied saying, well, because Svelte doesn't support it, basically. I was like, what? So yeah, I then sort of started investigating, pushed the issue a bit, and hopefully there'll be some more news soon with a bit of luck.
Exciting. So speaking of the maintainers meeting, you guys have that every other week or so, or is it every other month?
Once a month.
Once a month.
Yeah, typically towards the end of the month, but with Thanksgiving in the U.S. and Christmas both at the end of the month, it's the end of the year this year. It's getting a little dodgy. I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen this month, but we'll see.
I know the year will definitely end. It's scheduled.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Can you guys talk about anything that might be coming up that might be interesting?
Well, I mean, Svelte kit, will undoubtedly be talked about, and it will probably be the majority of the meeting.
Right.
But yeah, like Antony alluded to, there's usually a list of things that like come up during the month that we want to talk about, and then it's just a matter of accumulating thumbs ups to see like the order that they get talked in. Sometimes we will, in meetings past, we would end up talking about, we would have a list of like 7 or 8, and like Sapper would be second or third on the list, and then we just end up talking about Sapper for almost the entire meeting. So whatever we didn't get to just becomes part of the next month's list.
And I think that's sort of reason for Svelte kit being so important, because the reason Sapper dominated was because it is a bit janky in terms of code bases. It's kind of evolved and it's not really in a good place to maintain and stuff. So certainly it'll be nice to have that kind of off the list. Maybe Svelte kit will take its place, who knows. But it's an issue at the start of this maintainers chat. It was difficult to get past issues because they were big issues. But I will say that we've definitely got through those big issues now, and things are a lot more free flowing, I guess, which is definitely a good sign. And slots was another one that just had a lot of things around it people wanted. The original design was more limited than people needed it to be, and that got attacked pretty quickly. In fact, I mean, it's Tanlyhow just attacked most of it, but that's what he does, his machine.
Yeah, big props.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing to highlight, though, is the big, to me at least, the major value in Svelte kit is its flexibility. So like Sapper was great, especially in the beginning, because if you had a use case that fit Sapper, like it worked really well, right? But as time went on, your needs may change. You may need to add things. You may need to do more complex things because your apps evolve. And it's that fitting tends to not evolve with it, because it was so, opinionated is a strong word, but it was so good at just what it did that it wasn't really possible to have it move beyond. And so there have been really good community efforts for other solutions, Routify, Elder.js, forgetting some, but there are multiple out there. And so Svelte kit is sort of the Sapper 2.0, where it's going to be really good at a bunch of different things, so that your applications can evolve with the same tool over time, and not hit some sort of ceiling and be like, okay, shoot, now what do I use?
And more modular. Probably worth mentioning more modular, because I think that's a big theme, is modularity. Mm-hmm. Being able to sort of pull out things you don't want and put things in that you do want.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So Cloudflare Workers, I want to talk more about Cloudflare Workers.
Okay.
Well, what's so great about them?
Well, they're just incredibly quick, and they're practically free. So, I mean, most people, it's something like $5 and you get 10 million requests a month, right? And then it's 50 cents for every million beyond that. I mean, like, you can't beat that, right? And they also just execute quicker. So if you have something like a Google function or an AWS Lambda, like they have to start up, and most of what those platforms are doing over the years is trying to make those startups smaller. But like Workers launched with effectively zero startup. I think it's less than shoot, don't quote me. It's either less than 10 milliseconds or like 50 microsecond startup. Those are the numbers that come to mind, but it's one of those.
Why is that the case though?
Again, don't quote me. It has to do with how they store your upload. So they support multiple languages, and all of them have some relation to WASM. So I think what they do is they compile it on upload to WASM or some isolate, whatever, so that it's basically already in this ready to go state, so that instead of like starting a node process or starting a whatever, it's just there and an ongoing, again, this is how I imagine it, an ongoing V8 engine or something is just pulling in these different files, say, okay, you go, your turn. And so there's no parsing time, there's no ready, set, go, it's just go.
So essentially assembly language running on essentially a processor. So something like it's not interpreted, which Node and JavaScript obviously are. That's
right.
Interesting.
Again,
it's kind of backwards from where we came from.
Yeah, and it happens on upload. And I thought when I first ran into that, I thought it was a bug, but basically it's understanding your code when you deploy it. So the reason I ran into this is I was working on a validation library, which I still haven't finished, but the core of it relied on like a new function, right? Like you're programmatically creating a new function, and then the whole library was just creating this function body string so that it could be evaluated. But that's unsafe, right? And so Cloudflare Workers has this unsafe protection, so it disallows new function, disallows eval, and it was detecting that within 30 milliseconds of me uploading it. So the entire the request on my side was 30 milliseconds, and it came back saying, hey, on line, deeply nested line on like line 200, whatever, it's saying you're using a new function, you can't do that. So it's doing some amount of parsing, and then I remembered, it's doing isolates in the background, so it has to know what's going on.
Okay.
Like
don't know, the world's moving too fast for me.
I think like all of these like serverless, I don't know what to call them, like services, or I can't even imagine how complicated they must be to like make from scratch. It's pretty cool.
I imagine it's super satisfying though.
Yeah, I mean, once you got that running with no cold start time, and then it's been the biggest complaint of every serverless provider in the world, cold start time, then that's pretty impressive. Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine actually who was talking about Fastly doing a similar sort of thing, and he said that there is a lot of complexity with compiling to WASM because you can't rely on all those libraries being available that you normally have. You just can't bung everything in and ta-da. It's like writing isomorphic code on the client. You don't have things like process, you don't have file system, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I imagine it's deeply complicated, in fact. So the people who nail that are going to be the new AWS. Sorry, Shawn, but it's true.
I think Cloudflare doing amazing things. Yeah. Well, I always thought that. So the missing part is state, right? Like, and that's why I was pretty excited to see that they launched this like new durable object thing, which is actually strongly consistent. That seemed. At that point, I was just like, okay, Cloudflare, you own this. Like, this is amazing. I want to buy your stock. Like, this is.
I actually did buy Cloudflare stock the other week.
I mean, they're totally dominating this new cloud. So it's I mean,
I think the drawback is that you can't really, right? You can't really pull in any node library, right? In a Cloudflare Worker, can you?
Because of the WASM thing,
right? Yeah.
Well, you can't pull everything, but you can certainly pull a lot of things, right? Like it depends on how specific like the module was, right? Like most node libraries are so big that it's kind of impossible to know everything that's going on through all the dependency chain. But something like ClassX, right? Like my class name's alternative thing, like that doesn't care what you're running on. It's just a function that returns the string.
Yeah. So speaking of your libraries and stuff, so what motivates you usually to like build these? They're quite small, right? And they're very specific to certain problems.
Yeah, it's usually like curiosity, sometimes anger, but it's usually curiosity. So it's just to see like what's going on under the hood. And so I say anger jokingly, but like if I'm using something and I'm realizing that everything else I have in my application is small or is running pretty smoothly, but using this one thing or waiting for this one thing to run, doesn't feel quite right, then that's going to pique my interest and say, okay, what's going on there? Like, why this is just an HTTP request? Why is this thing like consuming hundreds of megabytes of memory? Or why is it failing half the time? Why do I have to do this in order to send that? So that kind of, you can call it like some form of OCD, I guess. It's just being particular, and I feel like things aren't exactly right. And so that kind of just goes somewhere into the back of my mind and say, okay, this probably should or could be done better. And then I get to at some point, and then I basically treat each one like a puzzle. So I add this extra constraint of making it either as small or as fast as possible, hopefully both, but that's usually not the case, and just see what I can do with it. But it does, well, unless it's like a necessary thing, like unless it's an application I'm actually working on and that bottleneck is currently present, some of these things can take months to refine and to figure out, just because it is a puzzle and it is for fun. But not most, pretty much, well, it is most, but 90-something% of the time, something doesn't get released until I know it actually works and it has been used in production stuff, either my own or client stuff, to say like, okay, like it did satisfy the requirements I had for it. And then so I try to have this unspoken promise that like if I release it, it should work, unless it's like a 0 dot whatever release, or has like a work in progress mentioned somewhere on it. But yeah,
I mean, I'll mention one of you have many libraries, and that's something I admire, but also am a bit terrified by. But so I think it's worth mentioning that I think Polka and Serve and Sade, I'm not sure.
Sade.
What?
Sade, like the musician. Is Sade
don't know who that is.
CLI framework that's as smooth as Sade's voice or something? That's the tagline. Should listen to it today.
All right. Well, we'll mention it. But yeah, like these are all used in the Svelte ecosystem. Like I think Serve is the default way Sapper was serving files, and that's pretty awesome, and it's pretty notable how fast it is. That was actually one of the first things that drew me into Svelte. I was like, oh, okay. It's not just about the compiler. It's also about the kind of people that are drawn to Svelte will also not tolerate the slowness that is in the rest of the JS ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So I think you are one of my prime examples of like, yeah, like if it's not good enough, you'll rewrite it, and you're not afraid to do so. Whereas I would.
Yeah, well, it is definitely daunting. So one, thank you, but two, like an example of this was just this week. Josh Duff is listening. He and I have been talking about me. Well, it was my fault, but I mentioned possibly having like another like node fetch in Node, but not node fetch, just because node fetch, I know it's being reworked, but it's pretty big, and most of the time you don't care about like the rest of what node fetch is doing. So I said like, oh, I'll just make another one, but it's kind of a bitch, to be honest. And like and I'm sure that the node fetch teams knows this, and props to them. But if my idea was just to set out like a very simple fetch compliant wrapper, so that you can use fetch as like you would in the browser, but in Node. But then I was like thinking, well, so many things are built on fetch, and so many things are built on like those properties of fetch that I don't use, but like the streams API, which everyone uses in the browser. And so many fetch-based wrappers would break in my current version of fetch just because it didn't implement streams. Well, this is where the bitchiness comes in, because implementing like readable streams in a browser way, which Node has always had streams, but not the browser's versions, is this becoming this huge undertaking. And so, yeah, it can take a while. And I guess one thing to mention, because people ask me a lot, is why the reason I have so many of these like mode variants of my modules, like DQL has DQL Lite, Clona has 3 modes. A lot of my things have modes, and the reason is because like I go through so many iterations of modules that like I'm trying to figure out what I want, but I'm also thinking, well, not in this fetch case, like not everyone's going to care about like the streams API, so they can just pull in the version that they want. So that if you want numbers now, if you want like the full Node fetch, it will be like 1.5 kilobytes or something, right? Which is mostly the streams stuff. But if you just want to fire off an HTTP request that uses a fetch looking API, like that's 400 bytes, right? And so it's just, again, most people don't care, especially in a Node.js context. But if you're doing something like workers, right? Or building a Svelte kit that can have movable backends. You know what your HTTP requests are going to look like. So you can just pull in a package that will satisfy all of those different backends, a browser version, a Node.js version, and a workers version if it's different, and just pull that in and it's ready to go. So that's kind of what motivates me with all these different modes, but it does mean that things take longer to finalize because I'm thinking of all these different use cases for how they might fit.
So speaking of Klona, I have to ask, is the name meant to be the Swedish word for cloning?
Yeah, so
it is?
I think it says on the top,
awesome.
it says like why Klona, and it says it means clone in Swedish, and then it also says why the sheep logo, and because it's Dolly. So Dolly the sheep was her first animal cloned, and so it's a sheep becoming a sheep.
Yep.
I had probably more fun than I should have had making that logo, but whatever, I'll own it.
I do notice that you spend time with the polish, like the logos, the banners, like these are it's nice touches. Yeah.
Sometimes, not all the time, but if something comes to mind that seems like it could work, then I go for it. Sometimes that affects the name choice too, if I can help it.
Are you squatting on any good names? Like, sorry. Okay, I'll tell you my squatting. So I have happier. So it's, and I also have prettier. So those are. If I ever want something, I can do that.
No, I don't think I have any. I have a name that I thought. So I only try to use names or reserve names if I like have a use for them. Because I have so many, I don't want to end up like in a situation where I get banned or whatever from NPM for squatting on names. I don't know, it's just risk aversion, I guess. But one name I do have that I planned on using but didn't was Y2K, and it's not really a good name, but I feel like it could do something with it.
Yeah, I feel like in general for libraries and repositories on GitHub, like it's always nice to see a good README or like a good. Like the first impression is more important than what most people would think. It's nice.
I think it should be something you want to read. README is one of those ironic names. Like I get this with clients all the time. You leave them this like really complex, or not complex, thorough README for them to read, to say like, this is what I did for you. Here's how to use it. And they don't read it. It's like, that's what the file is called. README.
Yeah. All right. Any last few questions?
Well, I wanted to especially highlight UVU, which is a test runner that I think it's been one of your more successful launches this year.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And
with that.
not like I pay super close attention, but it seems like it's worth talking about because most people think Jest is one of the most universally loved tools according to the surveys, and you made a competitor.
Yeah, maybe not in terms of like utility, but I definitely made a competitor that competes on the speed side, right? Like, so I'll have, the reason I made it is because I was working with a client that had a massive Jest suite, and it ran, and it's not specific to them, but it took minutes to finish, and it was only something like 100 suites or something, which may have been 1,000 or 2 assertions, but like 100 isn't that much at all. And then so I spent a weekend converting it into Uvu, and it was, so if I'm talking minutes for Jest, it was like 8.9 something seconds with Uvu. It's just like Jest was doing so much like setup and prep work and stuff. And a lot of it admittedly was how they were doing hooks, but like because Jest was set up, the Jest files were set up in a way that made it not obvious that their hooks were sort of running more than they should have been. It kind of just didn't feel right. And even in its best case scenario, you're looking at like probably would have been 45 seconds versus the same 8 seconds. So it still is slower at the end of the day, but as of today, you can do, for example, browser testing out of the box, which is a JS DOM backend anyway, but that's not something you can do with Uvu out of the box unless you set up a register hook or something. And I have examples of that in the repository. So you can definitely do it, but it's not, going back to the modes conversation a second ago, like I try not to put in things in by default unless I think it's going to be used by default. So I don't think most cases are going to want JS DOM by default. So I don't include it, but it's easily added if you do want it.
Awesome.
Nice.
Cool. Well,
all right.
Thanks for all your open source.
Of course.
Yeah. So do you guys have picks?
Picks. We've again
This is
not
where-
informed the guest of picks.
Yeah.
We do it every
he's
single
heard
podcast.
he's heard the show before.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's mostly just like whatever we enjoy as well, right? So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it could just
Nothing,
be like the
nothing
weather.
serious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't actually have one. Is this the first episode without picks?
Might be. I don't know either.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be tech related, right?
Doesn't
Nope.
have to be tech related.
Okay. I have a pick.
Go.
Okay.
Okay. So it's a game called Rummikub, which is kind of an old game and some people may have never heard of it. But basically it's like Rummy with cards if you've ever played with it, but it's with tiles. And I like it as a developer because when you have down these games of 3 or 4 or whatever, and it's either in straights. Oh, does Shawn have it? Rummy,
Oh.
So that looks like
Yeah,
a
I play it with my
knockoff.
family. Yeah, it's a knockoff Rummikub thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does the same thing. It's just you just need numbers.
Yeah, you just need numbers, and you can play with cards if you don't happen to have the game. It's basically 2 decks, but with 2 jokers, which are the wild cards. And I love it as a developer because it's basically refactoring the whole time. So like
Right.
you play these games down. Shawn's laughing because he knows, but anything that's down on the board is open to be regrouped and rearranged. So you have to keep track of all these pieces and arrange new games or new valid games using those pieces and not having any invalid games before your time runs out. So it's
I think
pretty
my parents have it. I think they must do. They've got.
fun. I recommend
must have
stealing
it.
it. It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
So
it's
so
like a
my
1970s
family's
version.
my family's story is like we played it at like a family gathering. One of my cousins brought it, and then we loved it so much that we got it for ourselves just within my family.
Uh-huh.
And then my dad got so obsessed by it, he downloaded a mobile app to practice on his own, and then he
Yeah.
started being insanely good. So there is some skill to this.
Yeah, I play every day. I mean, I played 3 rounds before the podcast this morning. So
Wait, by yourself? Like
on the
a-
app. So
Oh, okay.
there's an official Rummikub app or whatever, and you're supposedly playing other people around the world, but I'm pretty sure they're all bots. And but it's fun.
All right. Any other picks? I actually have one now. Go for it, Antony.
Oh, so I have a pick now because Luke inspired me to think of the whole cupboard behind me of board games and board and card games. So my pick is definitely Monopoly Deal. So if you like Monopoly, if you can imagine it being playable about 15 minutes. So yeah, Monopoly Deal. It is 15 minutes long Monopoly. No one can see on the camera anyway, so I'm not sure I'm holding it up, but I am. And it's super, super vicious. So if you think you get angry in Monopoly, you can get 3 times as angry in this in like a quarter of the time or something like that. It's crazy. It's just really, really nice, like fast-paced. The same kind of concept, but everything's sort of compressed down a bit so that things happen more rapidly and they happen more directly. And it's just great fun. So I recommend this game to anyone.
Does that just mean you get like more money more faster?
It means you get more money faster. It means you often, if you're me, get cards thrown at your face by your wife. It genuinely is
So you get her
the
money
whole thing
faster.
compressed. Oh yes, I definitely do. I mean, she would contest that, but of course, that's part of the fun, right? There's a lot of stealing. So I have at one point been playing with 2 other people, and at one point in the game had enough built up in my hand that I could take all of their stuff off the table. So it's just me having everything and no one having anything else. It's that kind of direct. It takes, if you play 1 round, you will learn all the rules, and that's all you need to know. It's not a long learning game. So 15 minutes and you're done, basically. Great
Nice.
fun.
All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
my family plays that too. So the 2 of you picked the top 2 games in my family. So fully endorsed.
I have a game as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
actually.
Ooh,
Or
okay,
rather a
we'll have to
gaming
make this a game
service.
thing. Yeah.
So I tried Google Stadia last
Ooh.
night, and I was actually blown away by how well that service works.
Nice.
If you don't have a gaming computer, so it's basically a cloud gaming service.
Right, but which one did you play?
But I played like one of the free ones that comes with the service. So I think it was Orcs Must Die 3.
A lot
know
of
if you've
thought
ever
went
heard
into
about
that
it.
name.
It's pretty cool though, like the service. Like there's no latency or
Wow.
it's pretty cool.
Nice.
I
Okay.
recommend it.
Okay, well, I had to pivot to a game pick because all of you picked games. So Jeremy Wagner actually pointed me to this one, but apparently this has been around for a while. Cookie Clicker has it's a browser-based game. Ortail.dashnet.org Cookie Clicker. Just Google Cookie Clicker, you'll get it. It's a clicker game, so you just click, and then you set up factories and machines to help you get more cookies. and it's a really mindless game, but it's pretty addictive. I had to close it down and stop playing because it was really that addictive. But it did give me an idea that our next Svelte Society or a Svelte Summit activity, because I think we want to try to have a tradition of like when we have a conference, we'll also give people something to code up and show off and demonstrate. And last time we picked something too hard, but I think the clicker game could be just good enough, where you can get creative and bring in some art assets and do some animations. So I think that would be my my pick.
Cool. All right, I think that's it. So Luke, where can people get a hold of you? Twitter, website?
Twitter, GitHub, Discord. Lukeed everywhere, but Lukeed05 on Twitter. That's it.
All right, cool. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you all the listeners for sticking with us for an hour. And
Happy New Year.
Goodbye, everyone. Happy New Year. Yeah, and Merry Christmas, I guess.
It's probably the last one before 2021. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely.
See you guys all next year.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.